Due to COVID-19, I was granted to be a part of a unique experience during my Education 460 placement at Denison High School. For my placement, I was given the opportunity to teach an 11th grade U.S. history class, teaching students in person and virtual students at the same time. It somewhat limited my instruction by keeping me isolated, which affected my movement around the classroom, but overall, it was a fantastic experience because I had an amazing class with excellent students and an opportunity to experience growth in the areas I needed to improve on and becoming an effective teacher. Believe it or not, managing student behavior is an area I'm most proud of when it comes to my instruction. Managing student behavior is a very difficult task for instructors because students, especially at a young age, simply like to have fun. In my personal opinion, school is supposed to be fun and students should have a fantastic experience during their time spent in school. But there are many situations where students get too out of control and managing their behavior is impossible due to the influences and environment that surround them. That is when effective classroom management skills and establishing a sufficient healthy learning environment come into play. By establishing a quality learning environment with the emphasis of essential classroom management skills, it allows students to maximize their learning in a positive environment that supports their progress towards achieving their goals. Throughout my time teaching at Denison High School, I built an essential relationship with my classroom students. Since students showed me quality signs of respect towards me, I did the same for them, which allowed the classroom to flow smoothly and sufficiently. Since I ran my classroom a specific way, students in my classroom started to build a routine and it ultimately paved the way for students to know, understand, and respect the classroom behaviors. This ultimately affected my instruction on a positive standpoint as well, because students were engaged, participated during my teaching, and demonstrated effort when completing assigned tasks. The next area I want to talk about is standard of alignment. During my Education 460 experience, I was placed in an 11th grade U.S. history class at Denison High School. In the 11th grade, U.S. history is a tested subject for the STAR exam, covering the history of the United States from 1877 to present day. So when planning for my instruction, I had to align my content with the TEKS consistently to maximize full achievement. In order to benefit my students' learning and make my instruction more interesting, I had an opportunity to apply relevance to student activities and assignments they had to complete in order to gain deeper understanding of the knowledge that is being provided. Each activity started and ended during an exceptional time frame. Usually I gave myself 7 minutes to run and have students engage in a full class discussion over the question I presented to them and review explanations. Then I lectured usually for about 20 to 25 minutes because it is enough time for me to cover the content and have students address the questions presented during the lecture. Finally, I usually give students the remainder of the class to complete their assigned activity. This was enough time for students to complete their activities because they were on task, engaged, and knew what to expect. Overall, I can definitely improve on this area by incorporating more interactive lessons that deepen the unit or content objectives. During the experience, I was somewhat limited on the activities and resources I could utilize for interaction and engagement, but for my future classes, I'm going to try and implement more interactive lessons to support my overall learning goals for the students. Like I said previously, 11th grade U.S. history is a tested subject for the STAR exam. So during my experience, I had to make sure that the content was aligned with the TEKS and my knowledge of the content was accurate. Currently, I am in the developing stages of this dimension, but I will say that this is an area that I can improve on easily. During my placement, we covered the civil rights era to the end of President George W. Bush's term. To convey the knowledge to the students, I would usually conduct a 20 to 25-minute interactive lesson over the historical counts we covered that day. Here are some examples of how I conveyed the knowledge of the students. During the lecture, I would provide students notes, show maps, and pictures to support their overall understanding of the account we were talking about that day. Also, to support students' knowledge of the content, I wouldn't just read what was on the slides. I provided detailed explanations with supporting facts over the historical accounts we were covering that day. I would say the PowerPoints are essential for the classroom because it served me and my students as a guide throughout the lecture and supported their understanding of the content. The activities I planned out during my experience in the placement field were essential for my instruction. For example, I usually started out my instruction by conducting a full class discussion to reinforce students' previous knowledge on the content they learned prior. I would provide my students with an overarching essential question relating to today's content and previous knowledge, like I have said before. At the end of each discussion, I would allow at least a couple of groups to share their thoughts and provide short rationales to the students, connecting their discussion to the content we were learning that day. During the lecture, I provided overarching questions for the students to discuss in groups and share their thoughts. This strategy supported student engagement and learning because students are collaboratively working together and the questions are built around the content, and they can ultimately support a deeper understanding of the account or event I am covering. Usually during my lecture, I would implement these questions, which required higher order thinking in between the slides to create an interactive lesson and allow students to discuss in groups over the questions provided. I usually allowed at least 2 groups to share their answers to the whole class to provide additional knowledge and that other students might have missed. This strategy supports student engagement and learning because students are collaboratively working together. The questions are built around the content, and they can ultimately support a deeper understanding of the account or event I am covering. To apply relevance to my instruction, I would usually take a very important piece of the content student needed to learn and connect it to the relevant claims to create a short-run response task for their exit ticket. This activity was successful since it required deeper thinking to properly address the question. Students usually address the questions with well thought out answers and provided information in their responses that either connected to them personally or connected to the real world in general. For my time spent in Education 460, I would say communication was the area I experienced the most growth in. I overcame many obstacles to adapt my communication skills in the classroom to benefit my students' overall understanding of the material. In the beginning of my instruction, I was predominantly in the developing stages for this domain. I had great communication skills all around, but some of the main problems I was encountering was getting students to communicate effectively to me or their peers. This was my first time ever teaching in a high school setting. I would say these problems that I was encountering came from me not being grade or performance level friendly embedded in my communication. Sometimes I believe the questions I would propose or the communication and instruction that I provided would be a little bit difficult to answer or understand for students, and sometimes they would be stuck or produce misunderstandings to me. This made me realize I had to change something quick because I need to ensure that my students were achieving understanding throughout my instruction. When I started to alter and adapt my communication in the classroom setting, students were starting to participate at a higher rate, and students started to provide well thought out answers as well. This essentially provided support for their understanding because students' overall performance in the class increased significantly. Over time, I developed my communication skills in the areas I need the most improvement in. And now I'm currently in between the proficient and developing stages. Personally, I feel like my communication skills were sufficient for my instruction. Before each activity was started, I would provide detailed instructions to the class and support students on Zoom in order for students to gain full understanding of what they are supposed to be doing at the moment. During the lectures, I would also ask questions during the slides to reinforce the content and usually allowed one student to answer the question. If students wanted to add in their thoughts, they would just simply raise their hand and add on to the explanation. I would allow adequate wait time for students to address the question. If students drew a blank, then I would provide a short, brief rationale over the answer I was looking for. If there was a misunderstanding, I would usually try to guide the student to the right answer by providing somewhat of a short explanation over a piece of historical account that connects to the answer. This was effective because when I demonstrated this technique, students usually who got the question incorrect the first time achieved the correct answer the second go around. Also, communication embedded in my PowerPoints and activities were great and performance level friendly. This allows students, especially my visual learners, to gain better understanding. Overall, developing growth in this domain supported my instruction significantly. By altering communication in the classroom, it increased student confidence significantly, which allowed students to be more engaged in the lesson and overall understand the material. I had an opportunity to work on my sorry, I'm having quite a differentiation teaching skills by aligning methods and attending diverse student needs during my instruction. Within my placement, there were 2 504 students placed in my class, and I had to accommodate them with the specific needs they used in order to achieve full understanding of the lesson. For example, I would provide accommodation notes to the students who needed them, and they would basically be engaged in a listening for information activity to support comprehensible input by filling out the blanks and answering true or false questions. The tools that were provided during my instruction ultimately supported diverse learners. For example, to benefit my visual learners, during my lecture, I utilized PowerPoint, displayed pictures, and used videos during my slides. The PowerPoint served as a guide for students so there is not any confusion on what topics I'm covering. Also, during the lecture, I had students create a timeline as their notes so they can see the causes and effects that lead from one another. For my auditory learners, I provided detailed instructions every time I shifted between each activity that we performed in the class and supported my facts with great reasoning. The next dimension I want to focus on is monitoring and adjusting. I'm currently at the developing stage in this area and have an opportunity to better myself in this area during my placement at Denison High School. On my initial arrival at Denison High School, I noticed that there was a divide in the classroom, with one half of the students actively participating and the other half of the students participating but not actively engaged. I wanted to adjust and give everyone an opportunity to feel like they were part of the class, so I started to incorporate group-related activities and assignments so all of the students can be actively engaged and participate. For an example, the group discussion supported student engagement by allowing students to actively speak and listen to one another about their thoughts over the topic that was addressed. In my opinion, I felt like the way I adjusted my classroom supported my students' overall learning because it supported student participation, which allowed students to become engaged and more interested over the material I was covering. The area I'm desired to grow in is the area that will ultimately benefit my teaching in the near future. The dimension in the dimension is the classroom environment. Currently, right now, I'm predominantly in the developing stage. During my time spent in 460 placement, the classroom environment was positive, safe, and sufficient. Usually, I organized my classroom in a specific way, which established a routine for my students. And as time progressed, students were familiar with the routines, which allowed student engagement and understanding to progress overall. Also, transitions between each activity were helpful for the students as well. I provided clear instructions to the students about the activity we are going to engage in. Overall, the students understood and wasted little time transitioning from one activity to the next. Also, by trying to establish an effective learning environment, I allowed my students to actively engage and discuss with one another during the activities or my instruction I presented to them. For example, there was a unit we were covering about the Cold War in the class. We were focusing on the American society during the 1950s and the 1960s by having students analyze the civilian side of the Cold War by identifying major economic, social, and political changes that impacted or affected American citizens. To transition into the lecture, I started off with a whole class discussion over the following questions. What were some of the social issues that were currently going on during this time period? How did it affect society? Before discussion took place, I reminded my students to think about some of the various movements, wars, and social change that was occurring during this time period. I allowed students to discuss with a partner approximately for 2 minutes. Obviously, some students were hesitant to share their thoughts, but overall students were actively engaged in the classroom discussion and shared their ideas with the class, and it was actually successful. Also, to grasp the students' attention during the lesson, students were presented with questions relating to the material being covered in class and had approximately 2 minutes to discuss with a partner. I called on at least two groups to share their thoughts regarding the question, and they successfully provided me the right answers with the correct details relating to the specific account that was being addressed in the question. To apply relevance to the content in the learning environment, I assigned a short written response task to the students for their exit tickets. The question was, how can the creation of medicine during this time period influence our creation of modern medicine currently? Since we were covering American society during the Cold War era, medicine was a topic that was being discussed during the lecture. I wanted students to connect with the natural world and see what their own thoughts were about this particular topic. Overall, I want to develop more in this area because during my experience, I felt somewhat limited to what I can and can't do. I want to establish a classroom environment where students are constantly being challenged, engaged, and participating during my instruction or activities during class. I want to build an environment where students in my classroom essentially establish friendships between one another so my students feel safe and confident when entering and being present during my class. Also, this will allow other students to support each other and it will maximize group participation and effort during the class. Overall, this was just the beginning of my long journey that was ahead of me. With the skills and knowledge that the program provided me, I can definitely improve in the areas that there is so much time to grow in. This placement was a very unique experience for me since it was my first time teaching in a high school setting, and COVID-19 had me engage in different practices of teaching by instructing students who were in person and who were virtual. I just want to really take a second here and thank all of the professors who really built the person and teacher I am and will be in the near future. This program has done me wonders, and I am eager to take my knowledge and practices to my own classroom. That end.